I'll call this regional council meeting to order. As soon as I can find the mayor's statement here. No, very well. Are there any CAO additions?
No, Mayor, no CAO additions.
I have no additions. Are there any councilor additions? Very well. Can I get a motion, please, to adopt the agenda? Moved by Councilor Andrews, seconded by Councilor Penny. All those in favor? Carried. Can I get a motion to adopt the minutes of the special regional council meeting of June 22nd, July 6th, and July 13th? Moved by Councilor Roper, seconded by Councilor Souls. All those in favor? Carried. Business arising, ratification of the email for a letter of support for agricultural labor study. Any comments?
I was studying agriculture labor all day.
There you go. Thank you, Councilor Souls. All those in favor of the letter of support? Carried. Public comment period. Are there any comments on the agenda before council tonight? Hearing none, I'll move on. Delegations, Mr. Chris Cooper, District Manager of the Fort Nelson Forestry. Flynn.
Thank you, Mayor. And thanks, Council, for making time for me today. So I had spoken to Doug Toff earlier last week, and we were having some discussions around stumpage and the stumpage rates, especially Table 6-3, which pertains to occupant license cuts, things like that. And the fact that for a long time, the current stumpage rate here in Fort Nelson is based on our neighboring timber supply area, which is quite far away. Process facilities are quite far away, and so it has not been a fair rate for folks in the Fort Nelson timber supply area that do want to cut some timber for different purposes rather than commercial timber purposes. And so we've been looking at this and been back and forth for quite some time, and we finally started to get some clarity from Timber Pricing Branch, and that clarity, I think, was somewhat brought to the surface when our North Area Assistant Deputy Minister, Eamon O'Donoghue, got involved, and he kind of was able to elevate it, I think, beyond what certainly a district manager or even our regional executive director might have been able to push, right? So we had this call with council last Friday to kind of discuss and lay out what our plan is going forward. And at the same time, I had offered to come and speak to the general counsel to, again, give that same sort of description and then take time for any questions that people might have on that. So essentially, without getting into too much down into the weeds, we need to present a rationale to the Timber Pricing Branch for the province to demonstrate how essentially the Fort Nelson TSA, the timber supply area, is set at a rate that's not representative and not really fair for folks in this timber supply area that want to cut small amounts of timber. And so, one part of that rationale is that we have not had a forest industry in the Fort Nelson TSA for over a decade. There have not been any timber sales. BC Timber Sales have not been able to, even though I think they have put up some blocks over the last 10 years, I gathered that nothing ever got a bid. And so you have that history that sort of shows, okay, well, there's currently not a market or a strong market for wood fiber in the Fort Nelson TSA. We need to go, but unfortunately, that alone is not enough for Timber Pricing Branch to just allow us to make a change. We need to go a little bit further, and so we take that history. Sorry, let me back up. One option for us to get this process started is to put up a block of wood for sale and see if it gets a bid. And so again, you might say, and I think Danny had brought this up on the call the other day, is, well, we have this history. Why do we need to put up another block for sale? Well, that history does count in the fact that we don't have to put this block of wood up for sale at the current stumpage rate, which is like $15.87, and then plus a silviculture levy on top of that to make it $19 or $20 a cubic meter wood. Put that up for sale, probably not get a bid on it, and then use that to then for our regional executive director to set an upset price on that block of wood. We get to skip that whole first part, and we get to go, because of the history, we get to go straight to an upset rate that the regional executive director has set. And so we've done that. That's been through our regional and north area process. It's got the appropriate approvals. I can tell you this is going to come out we're going to put this tender out later out this week. So we were actually able to set a 25 cent per cubic meter stumpage, right, with a $4.45 silviculture levy, which I guess apparently is not the correct term, but that's the term that makes the most sense. And so we're putting this up for, it's like right around $4.70 a cubic meter. The silviculture amount is fairly low because the area that we picked falls within Northern Rockies Community Wildfire Prevention Program. So we're fitting that under that piece of legislation to prevent or help reduce the risk of wildfire. Because essentially we're looking at a block that is a mixed species. It's a little bit heavier on the conifer side. So if that block were to be harvested under a wildfire prevention program, the silviculture obligation is now on me as the district manager. I would not want to go back in and plant it in full conifer because that's more of a fire hazard. Right? We're trying to reduce that. So that allows me to reduce those costs, which allows that amount of silviculture that you would normally put on a block to be lower. It's roughly half of what we would normally do. So essentially, we're going to be putting this block up for tender at about as low as a price as we can feasibly get to, and it still be reasonable from timber pricing branch's point of view.
Mr. Cooper, just before you go on here, and before I forget my thought here, I guess one of the concerns is that someone might bid on this simply to be, what would you call it, a little obstructive. Because if this is being used to set the price of the tabular rate here in Fort Nelson, and if an actor or someone wanted to obstruct other people from coming into the area, they may very well bid on this to simply set that price high enough that no one will come in and never harvest that wood. Is that a consideration that you're keeping in mind?
It absolutely is. And as the district manager, so I do have the discretion to determine what bids are eligible and what bids are not. And all bids I could determine as eligible. And then after that, I could cancel the whole thing if it didn't make sense. I would have to go through a process to do that. But certainly it's something that I can consider and try to help drive towards our ultimate goal.
I just wouldn't want a small piece of wood being used to drive the stumpage rates in the whole area. And other people may have alternative reasons for doing that, besides purely economic ones of harvesting and manufacturing. So that's one of the considerations that was I was thinking of anyway. Mm-hmm. But if you would continue on then.
Yeah. So we've got the area selected, and so we are initiating this week. We're initiating consultation, which will just be with Fort Nelson First Nation. It doesn't overlap with any other First Nations that would trigger additional consultation. So just Fort Nelson First Nation. We're going to advertise it and do consultation roughly at the same time. We are required to advertise this for a minimum of 2 weeks on through our government portal. So that'll go out on or before this Friday, the 14th. I'll also advertise it in the Fort Nelson News, in the newspaper, and I'll run that for 2 weeks. So that'll come out next week and the following week. And then the tender will close like on the end of this month. So that'll be our 2-week period. So probably the 28th is when it'll actually close. We'll see what we get, if we get a bid or if we don't get a bid. And then we'll continue to build our rationale from there.
And will the proponents that are bidding on this, will that be made public?
That's a good question. I don't know. I want to say it would be public, but I'm not for sure.
Okay.
So that's where we're at with that. More to come as we get this out to tender, and then at the end of the month, maybe I can circle around and give another update, just kind of see where we're at. So
We would appreciate that. Are there any questions? Councillor Penny?
Just wondering, one thing that kind of resonates back to me from our conversation last week was that this would set the rates for now. But if we did have a larger proponent that wanted to come in here and actually start up an operation, that they would immediately go up. Did I hear that correctly from, I think it would have been from their.
Yeah, so if our major tenure holder came back in and started harvesting wood again, that could affect the price. Realize, however, though, they'd have to haul that wood all the way they'd have to haul it to the nearest processing facility. That essentially would.
If hauling it out of here is one thing, it didn't sound like the price would go back up if they wanted to haul it out. It sounded like there was another processing facility that went.
That changes everything. Yeah. If there's a processing facility here and somebody is harvesting wood and processing it here in Fort, so this essentially that would reset Fort Nelson as a point of appraisal for our timber supply area. Right now, we don't really have one.
It just seems to me that if we are going to allow a lower stumpage rate, if they have to haul the logs, say to Fort St. John or to wherever, Dawson Creek or wherever, to be manufactured. So we're essentially giving them a break if they're taking raw logs out of here. But if somebody wanted to process something here and have a finished product to leave here, then they're going to get a higher fee. Whereas what we're looking for as a community is to get somebody to come and process the wood here. So it seems like that would be, apprehensive to come up here. This lower stumpage rate, in my mind, is what may trigger somebody to want to come back to our area. Because even though that if they're shipping out a finished product, it's still having to ship out of Fort Nelson. Doesn't matter if they're hauling raw logs. I mean, obviously it's a little bit less shipping because you got rid of the waste, but it's still what is cost prohibitive, obviously, to people coming back to open up a facility here.
Sure.
So if the lower stumpage rate was there to give them, a reason to come back. So that was the one thing that I heard out of that conversation we had the other day that kind of worried me. I'm like, okay, if we drop this stumpage rate now, this is great for, like I said, some smaller, if some people want to cut some small amount in our area, but I don't see it being a long-term fix for us. If somebody wants to come back and open up a big operation, we're going to jack those prices back up.
So think about it like this. If a company, under the current situation where there's no processing facility here in Fort Nelson, if they come up here and they harvest wood under some sort of tenure or buy it from the community forest or something, any number of ways, the reason why they would be getting a lower stumpage rate is because they would calculate and show the cost of shipping those raw logs from the harvest area down to the processing facility in Fort St. John. A company comes in and builds a processing facility here. They don't have those haul costs from Fort Nelson down to the processing facility in Fort St. John. So they would pay essentially that much more because they don't incur that hauling cost. So that makes the stumpage higher. It makes it more valuable. If they have to pay the hauling cost, that makes the fiber less valuable. So that's just part of
totally understand that, the hauling part, but it's still transportation from the Northern Rockies to market, right? Is what it comes down to. As I said, yes, it's going to save them a bit because you take a round log and you make it into a square stick. All the excess gets left here. I get that. So they're shipping out less wood than they would if they're taking out the raw log. But the fact is that we are more expensive to ship products out of Fort Nelson than we are out of Fort St. John. So I'm really glad to see that we're making a step to kind of come up with our own stumpage rate for Fort Nelson. But that's one thing that I would really hope that would be taken into account, is that just because their haul rates are lower or higher to go down there, the shipping rates to get the finished product out of here is still what's. So we need to figure out a stumpage rate that takes that into account, because the haul rate is definitely one thing, and that's probably one of the largest costs. I don't know. I've never been in logging, but I know what trucking costs and that sort of thing. But it's still right now, any proponent that we've talked to, they're worried about CN, they're worried about this, and it's transportation. It's getting the product out of here that keeps that price up, that holds people back from coming here. Really, we have everything else. I mean, we have what people are looking for. We have able and ready workers. We have a great community. We have facilities for families. We have everything we want, but it costs too much to get the product to market from here. And that's what's holding it back. So I can understand the stumpage rates being for the haul cost, but we need to get it so it also takes into account the transportation costs of the finished product.
So factoring or adjusting stumpage in consideration of the transportation of a finished product, I don't know how they would go about that.
Yeah. So I mean,
because you're talking about every finished product's different, right? Chips versus OSB versus dimensional. So yeah, I don't know.
I never said it was going to be that easy.
I understand that.
I'm just telling you what we need.
My first thought would be that could go strongly against softwood lumber negotiations, which I mean, ultimately our market is the United States. So we do have to consider what's going to happen to that product when it crosses the line. If we're making it really cheap to get out of the north here, great. But if it's so much that it looks like it's subsidized, they're just going to pay the price down there. The business case ends up being just
like I said, I totally understand it. It definitely wouldn't be an easy process, but if you can adjust stumpage for the haul side, it's still transportation, right? So they've figured out that part of it. There's got to be a way to adjust the other part. I mean, we're different in so many ways from so many areas, right? I mean, that's the one thing. We're the only regional municipality in BC. We take up all this land, and we have, these separate or these problems that most people don't have. They're a lot closer to a major line. They're closer to transportation. So there's many things that affect any product from getting out of here. And I mean, it's pretty proven. I mean, it's 12 years and nobody's wanted to cut a stick here when everywhere else is running out of timber. Nobody's come back here. So, but anyway, I won't belabor it any longer. But
Mr. Cooper, how do you fix the price of lumber if you only have one operator here? So in other words, when you put a block up for sale, and say we were to get a manufacturer here who's manufacturing something, you sort of have it's a captive seller and a captive buyer, and I don't know how you discover a price that way. So, it's not like you had a lot of companies that were bidding on a block of wood. You only have one company bidding on a block of wood. How do you ascertain a price in that environment?
So you're talking about companies that purchase BC timber cells, blocks of cells? Well, even a single company they got to make the numbers work, right? So even if they're the only bidder, they're only gonna. BC Timber Sales needs to sell wood for a certain price. They need to recover costs. Okay. They need to set some sort of a markup. Any bidder's got to, like, that number essentially has to
like your upset price
business plan.
So BC Timber would have an upset price.
Yeah.
So a potential purchaser, if they were the only game in town, they would simply bid the upset price and nothing more.
Sure.
And then that would be the price.
But it's on BC Timber Sales' responsibility to for that upset price to make all the considerations that you
Okay.
would normally make and include those costs, and so that essentially they can't go into the hole
Mhm.
on these cells.
Okay.
And they can on certainly some blocks they do, but then they make it up on others. There's overall they have to cover their cost.
Are there any other questions, councilors? Councilor Souls.
I shouldn't get started because it's hard to stop. The issue of incentivization, like that's what Councilor Penny was looking at in that way. That's what it would be seen as under the softwood lumber agreement. If we were to create a low cost stumpage rate for the north in order to stimulate local production, it would definitely look that way. The flip side of that coin, though, is that a forest that's not being harvested is also very useful leverage in the world of softwood lumber management, because we can use it. We can use our lack of activity for many years to prove that we're not subsidizing anyone in the harvesting of timber in the province, even at the same time as mills are running out of wood in other parts of the same province. So it's actually kind of useful for the Ministry of Forests in an argument, or the Canadian government in an argument with the states over softwood lumber. It's quite useful to have a dormant forest that used to be active. Okay, so with that in mind, I once again bring back some of the history, and I bring it on. I know that we can't go back, and I'm not trying to turn the clock back, but in the early days, there's a reason why they had established a very low stumpage rate here. It was a negotiated stumpage rate that was far lower than anywhere else in the province, and it was the condition on which our previous proponents built. Without that promise from government of really low stumpage here in this area, we would not have a history of forestry in Fort Nelson at all. So this is the balance that we have. Now, if that was the reality then in the mid-70s, late 70s, early 80s, if that was the reality then as an incentivizing, using the stumpage reduction as an incentive, and now we've been down for 12 years, how are we supposed to look at ourselves as a community? Because old maybe because I was here for almost the whole thing, but really, are we starting a new industry here, or are we restarting an old industry here? And I think that I find that a really good question when I talk to residents in our community, because if we were to start a forest industry, about half the people in our community have never been here while there was a forest industry, and it's a completely new thing. Some of us older guys that were in the forest industry, we see it as restart. So I know this is all philosophical perspective, but we are stuck in that perspective. And if there is no way of creating a low-cost fiber supply here, we will not see this. Because I know some of the competitions that take place in the forest industry itself as to who can be the lowest cost producer, not only on the log side, but on the high-tech lumber mills. We have the most high-tech lumber mills in the world in BC, and they're competing with each other to make it so that they can bring logs from the farthest point. We can't build facilities. No one will build facilities like that here in this community and be able to compete with their numbers, regardless of the transport. There has to be a way of incentivization, or we will not see a conifer manufacturer.
Did you want to respond, Mr. Cooper? Or?
I mean, that's all great points. I see. Yeah, I see your viewpoint. It's it's tough, right? Like it's, I mean, one argument might be that just from a utilization perspective, that we're still having beetle kill problems. We're having new beetles.
Yeah, new beetles.
Yeah, they're just switching to the different tree. We're still having fires. We're still trying to get ahead of that stuff. The timber supply in the interior is still declining, where here it's not. So, I mean, that doesn't necessarily drive a processing facility up here.
Just by harvest.
Sure.
Councilor Penny.
The other thing I wonder about, It's been on my mind for the last couple of years. We haven't been managing this forest because we haven't had anybody out there cutting any wood. How much more danger could that potentially put us in? We look at communities to the south of us, the east of us that have, you know, burned almost to the ground.
Mhm.
And now we're, you know, have all this old growth that's growing up through our whole community. So I'm wondering how much that possibly can sway to put out these, put out whatever we need to do to get somebody up here to start cutting some of this wood and processing it here. I want to make that clear. We don't haul the logs out of here, but like I said, it's been a long time. 12 years is a long time, I think, for a forest to not be managed. So
Yeah, it was a huge undercut for sure.
mhm.
And it's probably growing, I would imagine. I mean, every year.
Trees grow all the time.
Any other questions, councilors?
One other comment, and that is that
Your mic, Councilor Souls.
one other comment, along the same vein of what you're asking. You're talking from a forest health perspective or a fire perspective. But an argument that needs to be continued, and I wouldn't be surprised Mr. O'Donoghue is making this argument to the financial branch, but maintaining this high stumpage all of these years with the intent of protecting an asset value that's meant to be sold, and if it doesn't get sold, it burns up or it gets old or the bugs get it or something. They've had zero revenue for so long. That should have long ago been a trigger to say they have to do something about the stumpage rates here, because the lack of it's like having a grocery store full of food and no one's buying any of it. Best thing to do is to put it on sale and people will come and buy. It's really that. It makes me wonder. I honestly, as a citizen here, it makes me wonder though, if the existing forest industry in BC are not the players that we need here.
Yeah.
I think we need someone with a more comprehensive view of what wood uses are other than just plywood and lumber and 2x4s and so on.
Sure.
Anyway.
Councilor Roper.
I understand that the stumpage rates are calculated annually in BC, whereas in other places they're a little more responsive. They might be calculated monthly. Is there any? Is anyone looking into implementing more responsive calculations?
So I'm not the expert on this by any means. I think it was every 3 months that they were being calculated.
Okay.
And then as part of both the coastal and the interior forest revitalization process that John Allen, our deputy minister, has been driving over this past year, was to look at that and see if we could be more responsive, because what we see is that lag time of the market shifts the opposite direction of where it's been, but stumpage is only just catching up. And so they had talked about one of the options was to shorten that stumpage renewal to 30 days. I don't know exactly where that sits now, if that's something that's still driving forward. One counter argument to making that adjustment is, while the adjustment would be closer to the fluctuations in the market, when the market goes up and stumpage is 3 months behind, that's 3 months of gravy essentially for all those forest companies. Whereas when the market goes down and stumpage is high, well, then it's so over time it probably still kind of balances out. I think if you look over a whole fiscal year, I don't know how much difference you'll actually see, except that just the changes will be more closely aligned.
I believe, Mr. Cooper, the calculation is what they do is they take the lumber price for 3 months, and that affects the stumpage 3 months after that. So they are always 3 months, actually 6 months between the time they implement the new stumpage price from the beginning of when their calculation went. So I think it's 3 months of looking at the lumber price, and then the stumpage is going to be fixed in the future in another 3 months. And a lot of people within the industry have said what this does is it causes kind of like a negative feedback where you get these spikes and these valleys and these spikes and these valleys. So lumber companies are very profitable for a certain 3-month period, very unprofitable for the next 3 months, very profitable for the, and I think you're right, Mr. Allen has been looking at this to try to get this time shortened up one way or another, either through the calculation and implementing it at a shorter time, or doing something to get that straightened out. But I believe if I understand correctly, that's how they're doing the stumpage rates. And Councillor Souls.
That is true, but I just remind everyone that has less relevance here than anywhere. And when we were working with in conifer logging around here, it's a winter exercise. There simply isn't that much accessible conifer in the summer to balance it out. And so the bulk of our harvesting would take place in the winter regardless. So whether the stumpage is in one of those peaks or whether it's in one of those valleys was pretty irrelevant to here.
That's a good point.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Cooper? Any questions? No? Okay.
I just have to say, I'm glad to hear this. It's actually a surprise to me that the stumpage that you've set out as essentially a salvage rate plus a silviculture rate. That's pretty amazing that they've come that far. That's really, I just can't believe it.
Yeah, that worked out good.
Yeah.
Well, I will thank you very much for coming and doing the
Could y'all indulge
presentation.
me for just one?
You betcha.
minute? So there was one other topic that I wanted, a completely different topic.
Okay.
So folks may have heard over the past couple of months, really since COVID-19 really kicked off, and we started to see some spread across BC, and some cases creep up into the north, and obviously there's a lot of First Nations communities that are extremely concerned because I guess there is a possibility of a more sensitive type outbreak, or more sensitivity towards this particular virus in these communities, and they either don't have medical facilities or health facility support of any kind, or they're very far away from that. And so certainly they've been expressing a lot of concern, and that concern has grown as we get closer into, as we get into the summer and get into higher amounts of recreation and people within BC traveling, and probably more BCians traveling within BC because they don't, they don't want to go outside of the province necessarily. Coming up into the north and sort of potentially increasing the exposure to some of these communities. And so some First Nations have started to put out public advisories or news releases, either discouraging folks from, certainly warning people off of coming into their communities, onto their reserves, which makes total sense. You saw almost all of the First Nations basically lock down their communities when this first kicked off, and that makes total sense. But a more recent development is that a lot of First Nations are wanting to see a restriction on hunters coming into their traditional territory. So not just the communities, but the larger traditional territories, and essentially would like to see a decrease or restriction on non-community members coming in to hunt. And so we've started to see some messaging out from different First Nations. So I just wanted to have a quick discussion with you guys and to let you know where the province stands and where the region stands on this. So when it comes to First Nations protecting and restricting access to their communities and their reserves, absolutely the province supports that. They do not, however, necessarily have the authority to restrict people from their larger traditional territories. So they don't have the authority to restrict access to Crown land. So access points to recreational sites on Crown land, hunting on Crown land, that type of thing. That authority doesn't exist. When you read some of the news releases from some First Nations, not the First Nations in the Northeast region, but some of our neighboring areas, some of it's really strongly worded, like we restrict, you cannot come in. And so I hope that that doesn't cause, any confrontations, but we'll see how things play out. What is more pertinent to the Northeast region is Casca Dene Council and Casca First Nation, which has our closest community would be Lower Post, the Delu Dene First Nation. So they put out a similar type of news release. They did it in conjunction with what they call the Three Nations. So that's Casca, Tahltan, and Tlingit First Nations. And so the Casca one is somewhat similar in that they are discouraging people from coming into their traditional territory to hunt, but they're not saying that they are restricting access. They would really like to see folks stay out of the area that's close to Lower Post. So sort of in between Fireside and Lower Post, for where in that area they would like to see people avoid that, in consideration of the fact that they don't have the medical support or the health support that other communities have. And so, and I've spoken with the Casca Regional Councilor just to confirm that what I thought that they were messaging out is exactly what they're messaging out. So same thing, please respect their communities and eliminate exposure within those communities. Within the larger traditional territory, if you're recreating, hunting, accessing Crown land, absolutely, that's your right. It's the right of all people, residents of BC. We would just ask that be aware that these folks are in a more sensitive situation than some of us others that live in town or live down south. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that up, let everybody know where we're at with that. I have spoken with Casca, and yeah, that's the message that they're trying to convey to folks.
Our relationship with Fort Nelson First Nations is very good, and I've heard the same issues. They are very sensitive to COVID-19 and the impact it could have on their community, and we have to be mindful of that. Our municipality, of course, does not have any jurisdiction over Crown land. That's the province, and it's between the province and First Nations, but we do listen and we do take into consideration, thanks to Chief Gale and her council, has had, open meetings, council to council meetings with our council to discuss issues of mutual interest. And it's always good to bring these forward, and it's always good to put them on the table. I haven't specifically heard of anything like that where anybody is being restricted, but we are very mindful of the impact to our community may be less than what the perception is on First Nations of what COVID-19 could do to their communities. So we're very mindful of that. And we are very careful about COVID-19 here, and we've reached out to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and told her that, we want people who are traveling through our region to be respectful of the rules and regulations that are set by the province of British Columbia to protect all its citizens. So I'm glad you brought that up, and it is an important issue that I think this council is very much aware of.
Excellent.
Once again, thank you very much, Mr. Cooper, for bringing that forward to us today. And all the information that you provided, we look forward to hearing back from you in the future when you've got more information for us. Thank you very much. Moving on, administration report. Was there any other comments from any of the, okay, very well. Moving on, admin report number 53. Airport fencing installation contract 2020-18 award. Mr. Cavalier, would you like to speak to this?
Thank you. Good evening. This is the last remaining tender for the airport project. The other 4 tenders have been awarded, and this is for the installation of the perimeter fence. Just as an update, if you award this one, 4 out of the 5 tenders were awarded to local contractors.
Excellent news. Very well. Are there any questions, councillors? Very well. In that case, I'll ask for a motion. Moved by Councillor Soul, seconded by Councillor Penny. that we accept the recommendation of the airport fencing installation contract be awarded to BKT Wall Contractor for the amount of $574,500 plus a 10% contingency and all applicable taxes to be funded from the approved airport perimeter fencing budget. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Moving on, administration report number 54, sanitary sewer collection renewal programs, Cavalier.
Hi there. So this is part 2 of the sanitary renewal program. Part 1 is awarded earlier in June. So this is for a mainline replacement on 41st, I believe. So another local contractor.
Very well. Are there any comments, councillors? Very well, I'll ask for a motion. Moved by Councillor Roper, seconded by Councillor Andrews. All those in favor of the recommendation? Carried.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cavalier. Admin report number 55, fourth quarter grant and aid request. One application for the 2020 fourth quarter grant and aid program from Lamplighters. Are there any comments, councillors? Very well, I'll ask for a motion then. Moved by Councillor Andrews, seconded by Councillor Penny. All those in favor? Carried. Admin report number 56, connectivity in the Northern Rockies Region Municipality low Earth orbit satellites for information. Miss Jacobs.
Hi, everyone. Yes, we prepared a report that outlines Starlink, which is an emerging low Earth orbit satellite company. It's likely that Starlink is currently may be able to provide internet in the coming years.
Very well, thank you. We received that for information. Are there any questions, councillors? Councillor Roper.
Just a comment. I really enjoyed reading the report. It's good to have that information come to council. And I just want to reiterate how important it is for our region to be pursuing these connectivity strategies. It's really going to make a big difference in the years to come. So I think there's a lot more work to do and a lot more to find out, but this is really good information. So,
thank you, Councillor Roper. Admin report number 57, request for correspondence regional connectivity for decision. Ms. Jacobs.
Yes, we also wrote an email, or sorry, a draft letter that may be sent to the province, sent to Citizen Services, as well as forwarded to our local MLA and MP. And this letter outlines the work that the Northern Rockies Regional Municipality has done on broadband connectivity, as well as highlights the work we've done last year with our regional connectivity strategy. So following council's advice, we'll have the opportunity to send this to the province.
Thank you. I would just add that perhaps we should send this to Mr. Farnsworth, Minister of Public Safety as well, since we have corresponded with the minister regarding the safety aspects of connectivity up and down the highway. Are there any comments, councillors? Very well. Can I
make a comment? I think that it's important that this is a reiteration as well. It's important that we, given the nature of the Northern Rockies and the scope of it, consider when we're making this kind of appeal that we're appealing on behalf of our neighbors who live in our municipality, like especially up highway neighbors. But so we can speak to the powers that be from that perspective, and what other municipality can you think of anywhere else in the province where some of the residents don't have access to the same connectivity as other residents within the municipality. Very important. I think that's a very important tact to use, because it's it's a different word picture in your mind. Thank you.
Very well. Can I get a motion then? That we send this letter? Moved by Councillor Roper, seconded by Councillor Penny. All those in favor? And that passes unanimously. Northern Rockies Regional Municipality zoning amendment. Single family setbacks, bylaw number 184, 2020, for third reading and adoption. Can I get a motion, please? Moved by Councillor Soul, seconded by Councillor Andrews. All those in favor? Carried. Tax sale deferment. Mr. Barry, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, you sure can, Mayor. So as per previous council meeting, it was discussed, the provincial orders gives council the authority to, by bylaw, to defer the tax sale for 1 year. And a question was asked at the meeting if a process could be put in place around applying for it, or some sort of process that way, which can't be. It's either all or nothing. So the bylaw goes in and a deferral could happen, or if council wishes, we can continue to have go through the tax sale process as of the end of the last Monday in September, which should be September 28th, I believe, this year. So just based on council's direction, they asked for the bylaw to be drafted and would decide tonight if they wish to proceed, and if so, can go for first, second, third reading and adoption.
Personally, as far as tax sales go, we all have to pay taxes. And when it gets to tax sales, we're looking at 3 years that people have not paid their taxes. I don't know if deferring it for a 4th year is particularly beneficial. I don't know where other councillors sit on this. If there's any comment on this? Councillor Souls.
I think that given that you bring up the 3-year process that it actually takes, that's what's real. That's not what's real in the mind of people until they start digging. It looks like an annual miss your taxes, see you later, goodbye house, and so on. And so I think that you're absolutely right that there isn't necessary. I don't think there's any necessity to defer.
Councillor Penny.
I would say I was on much similar mindset, but thinking about what's happened here since 2015, and I know that there's a lot of people that are struggling and they're just barely hanging on, and now with this COVID-19, maybe they would have scratched together enough, because I do believe that as long as they stay within, if they would have paid their taxes this year for 3 years ago, then they come off the sale. Right? You need to be delinquent for 3 years and then you go to sale.
You're in arrears in the 3rd year. Once you're in arrears, you're delinquent. And then you would go to tax sale, and then the payment that you would make, you don't need to become whole. You have to pay.
You need to pay that.
You can, and people do that. They come in to keep at a tax sale. They'll pay that 3rd year. What this would do, if council elected to go to go through this process or to pass this bylaw, would delay that for a year. But then it's 4 years. They'll have 4 years plus 3 years next year. In terms of a cost to municipality, besides the lack of revenues that we would receive for either sale or people were to pay, there's no other cost, because obviously it's not like you're waiving the costs, you're deferring it a year. So people would add a 4th year to their pile, and then additionally, any interest charges would be accrued during that time.
So my feeling is that if this would have been a normal 5 years in Fort Nelson, I totally agree with the fact that, yeah, putting it off 1 more year is probably not gonna make any difference, but there's so many people that are in that position that have been just barely scraping by for just 5 years. And now with this COVID that's hit, I mean, it's unprecedented, right? That's the word that we got sick of for 4 or 5 months now. Like, it's unprecedented. There's so many people that were just barely hanging on that are now, I mean, their thread is almost torn. So I don't see it being, like I said, it's not going to become a loss to us. It's just going to defer again 1 more year. How much that negative impact it have on our coffers, I don't think would make that much difference. So I think putting it for 1 more year, it could be huge. Exactly, right? It could be huge for a family this year. But for the municipality as a whole, I don't think it's going to make that much difference. So I'd be
Any more comments on that? Very well. Councillor Penny, do you want to make the motion?
I'll make the motion that we take option number 1, recommended proposed Northern Rockies tax sale deferment till 2050.
Seconded by Councillor Roper. All those in favor? Register me as opposed. Your karma ran over my dog, Mr. Penny. Northern Rockies Regional Municipality Airport Fees Amendment Bylaw number 186 for first, second, third reading and final adoption. All right. Mr. Perry, did you want to speak to this?
Sure, it's based on previous council resolution to proceed with this bylaws been amended to waive the landing and enplaning fees. It's just to work towards getting the airport and air transport back to some kind of well, any type of service at this point, which currently is scheduled in September, and then to review again by the end of the year.
Any comments, councillors?
And there's a small tweak, sorry, there was a fee that we were charging at the airport for the use of the direct line for shuttle services, and which technically we can't be charging a fee unless we have it in a bylaw. So that's been added to this bylaw. So we have the ability to do it.
Any comments, councillors? Very well. I'll ask for a motion. Councillor Penny.
I just want to say that I commend the staff for actually bringing this forward, because if this would have slipped by and we lost service and we lose our funding for the airport, could cost this community far more than we're going to lose by getting rid of these. And it's because of the staff that are looking forward, thinking about this, that this is brought up. And I just wanted to thank them for it.
Once again, it's glaringly obvious we have rock stars in our administration. Motion, please. Moved by Councillor Souls, seconded by Councillor Andrews. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Correspondence, letter to George Hyman, Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategy, reopening of the Liard Hot Springs Provincial Park. Letter to John Hawkins, Director of Recreation Sites and Trails, and a letter to Doug Donaldson, Minister of Forest, Lands, Natural Resources, Operations and Rural Development, Tabular Stumpage Rates, Port Nelson District. Do we need a motion for those?
No, Mayor, it's just correspondence. Letters have already been sent.
Okay. Information package, council information package, July 15th, July 22nd, July 29th, and August 5th received for information. Mayor's discretionary charges reports, I believe it's a nil report, since there was no travel. Any comments on any of those items? Northern Rockies Community Arts Council requests to use the Town Square parking lot September 12th, 2020. That, I believe there's been some correspondence with the Arts Council that they are backing away from the September 12th date, and they just want sometime in September or October to use that parking lot. They may want the 12th. They may want October. Do you need a resolution for that? Can I ask for a resolution to allow the Community Arts Council to use the Town Square parking lot sometime in September or October? I believe a more definitive date will come along at a future date. Moved by Councillor Penny, seconded by Councillor Andrews. All those in favor? Carried. Standing items for discussion, councillor reports. Are there any councillor reports? Very well. Strategic planning meeting. We're looking for some dates for strategic planning in September, October.
looking potentially to have a meeting with council towards the tail end of September. So just looking at potential availability, if there's any flags in terms of councillors in terms of availability after the UBCM virtual conference, and thought it was a good time then in terms of vacation time, things to do a bit of a reset and take a look at the strategic priorities and give an update on where we are in certain projects and things with council and council's priorities. Just we're throwing it out, and we'll get some more correspondence on this. On the secure date tonight, it was more around if there was any flags in play regarding council absences in say the last couple of weeks of September.
I'm good for September. I think I'm good probably. There may be something the last 2 weeks of October, but I'm not sure.
Okay, so we'll provide some more correspondence, and we'll start firming up some dates. We just want to throw it out, and also just as an FYI, so in case any councillors are wondering where we were with the process and updating them on the strategic priorities.
Very well. Moving on, public media questions. Are there any online, Ms. McIver?
E.D. Vandersteen from the Chamber would like to address council.
Very well. Go ahead, Mrs. Vandersteen.
I think she has to accept. Bev, did you get the invitation to speak?
Hi.
Holy.
That's working.
Okay, connectivity at its finest. This happens periodically, usually at the most convenient time when I'm actually trying to demonstrate the connectivity issues that we have in the north. I just wanted to ask for council's leniency, perhaps in meeting to discuss some of the priorities in front of the BC Chamber currently and prior to your UBCM meetings.
Be willing to maybe have a special council meeting regarding our priorities?
Either a special council meeting or your next council meeting, I could come in as a delegation if that is more convenient.
Mayor, there is a council meeting on the 14th, I think, is the regular meeting in September. So that's one that council, if that works.
Will that be early enough to, with the UBCM coming up at the end of the month?
It's the week of ministerial meetings. Yeah. At this point, though, we don't know what, we won't have any confirmation. It doesn't seem until the first or second week of September in terms of what ministerial meetings will be accepted, or which ones we'll have success with.
So perhaps, Ms. Vandersteen, we'll get staff to look at various dates. If necessary, we will have a special council meeting for that. Depending on dates that we've got for UBCM and scheduling.
Perfect, sounds great. And the 14th certainly works for my schedule as well, if that's more convenient.
Okay. Anything else? Very well, hearing nothing, I will ask for a motion to adjourn this meeting. Moved by Councillor Andrews, seconded by Councillor Penny. All those in favor? And we are adjourned.